Guitar Business Radio is the podcast for the business of guitar, where you'll always get no reviews, no demos, and no idle chatter. From players to CEOs and in between. If you have a professional or business connection to the world of guitar, this show is your window to insight and information you won't get anywhere else. I'm Jeffrey D. Brown, and I approve this message. So let's get to it. From Guitar Business Media, welcome to the 69th episode of GBR, the show that offers you an eclectic and often uncompromising view of the guitar world you won't get anywhere else. And I hope that today's show will once again live up to all of the hype, and there is a lot of that for sure. So first, we have a little bit of housekeeping. Not sure why they call it that, but we'll just roll with it. So I want to talk about participation. Now, one of the things I've always tried to do on GBR is involve as many people as we can in setting up content for the show. We don't have a dedicated producer to book the guests, although actually if you know somebody who would be interested in that job and can fit the bill, we're willing to pay a fortune for that. A fortune. Seriously. It's a valuable position. It can make things a lot easier for me, and we might end up with fewer shows like this one. Now, just to be clear, when I say fortune, I am, of course, referring to, you guessed it, fortune cookies. That's our currency of choice. After all, what's your fortune worth? Don't ask your financial consultant. They won't know. It's above their pay grade. You have to go straight to the cookie for your fortune. And if you're lucky enough to become a producer on GBR, you'll have more fortune cookies than you'll know what to do with. But the good news is you'll always know what to expect in life because the cookie knows. So the cookie's in your court. We'd love to hear from you. Now, I want to talk briefly about Summer NAMM. It's coming up in the middle of next month in Nashville. Some of you will be there. Some of you will not. But most of you will be impacted by it one way or another. You see, even though it's a much smaller show than Winter NAMM, it's still a big media event. There's a lot of activity surrounding the show, and that means there's a lot to talk about. And if you're in the business of guitar, whatever that means, and believe me, it can mean a lot of different things, then don't you want to be part of the discussion? Don't you want people talking about you or your company or your products and services? I would certainly think you would. And whether you'll be in Nashville from July 18th through the 20th or not, it's immaterial if nobody is talking about you. So if you'll be at Summer NAMM, hopefully you've got all your ducks in a row now. All of your marketing materials are produced and ready to go. Your press releases are signed, sealed, and scheduled. You can rest easy. All is well. Of course, if that's not exactly the case or you can't make it to Summer NAMM, but you want to get on the media bandwagon and ride into town without actually being there, well, you probably know what's next, right? Exactly. A commercial for our company, Guitar PR. That kind of says it all, doesn't it? What more do we have to say other than nobody does what we do the way we do it for what we charge? If you're not sure what that means, but you are curious, then I highly encourage you to stop what you're doing right now. And that means stop listening to this podcast, put it on pause, and head over to guitarpr.com. guitarpr.com. You'll be happy you did, and on top of that, you won't regret it. And frankly, if you do, that's just none of our business. Now today, we're bringing you the final installment of our very popular, fabulous, amazing intros series as we look back at episodes 32 through 43. Now, by now, you've probably figured out that we're skipping over some episodes that didn't have any interviews because, well, that really wouldn't fit the format for this series. And we're not including the rest of the shows because, of course, they're just too new. But first, let's take a much-needed break in the action and do something completely different. Okay, so this is the finale in our series called Fabulous Amazing Intros. Now, I know that some of you may be asking, why is this the finale? What does that mean? And I want to make sure there is no confusion at all. This is the final show of this series, not the podcast, the series. And we decided to call it the finale so you wouldn't think there was any possibility of a Volume 5, because there will be no Volume 5. This is it. Next week, we'll be returning to our familiar format with a very special guest I think you'll find quite interesting. I know I will. However, that will be then, and this will be now. So welcome to Fabulous, Amazing Intros, the finale. So I've known Michael Melenda not well for quite a while. He's been a Facebook friend for a long time. That doesn't mean much. I've corresponded with him on occasions for one thing or another, but I have to tell you that doing this interview with Michael was an eye-opener. He's got a terrific story, and we were the first show in episode 32 that detailed his unplanned departure as editor at Guitar Player magazine for 21 years. Fascinating. And here's the intro. So Michael Melenda got his start in the publishing world at the start of the 90s after a decade as a working musician. He made a big impact as editor of Electronic Musician magazine until around 1997 when he joined Guitar Player as editor-in-chief. Well, the rest is history, and I think we'll just let him fill in all the blanks as Michael Melenda joins us right here and right now. So Michael is a very engaging guy, and when I was at Winter NAMM this year walking around outside in what I kind of always think of as the quad, and I hear somebody yelling out my name at a fairly loud level, and I turn around, and it's Michael Melenda. That was great talking with him, but unfortunately, a sandwich was calling my name a bit louder, and well, I had to exit. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Gator cases. They've grown into one of the most prominent case manufacturers in the country. Recently, they acquired Levy's, the well-known strap company, and they've expanded into a variety of markets beyond guitar and musical instruments. And I was very fortunate to have their CEO, Crystal Morris, on with us in episode 33. And this is the intro. So Crystal Morris has been with Gator Cases since the beginning. In fact, she founded the company with her dad in 2000. And in the 18 years since, has built the company into a powerhouse in the case business. She's a very busy CEO and an industry participant in many ways. Earlier this year, she completed the purchase of Levy's, the very well-known strap company, what really appears to be a synergistic move for sure. And there's much more to talk about, so let's get to it as Crystal Morris joins us right here and right now. Now, I had a chance to meet up with Crystal at Winter NAMM for about 7 seconds, but we had a lengthy conversation, compared notes, and ultimately went our separate ways, all in about 7 seconds. But if you're interested in spending a bit more time with Gator Cases, just visit gatorcases.com. Well, I've known Juha Ruokangas for over a decade. He's a fantastic guitar builder in Finland, and we traveled over 6,000 miles via Skype Airlines to have a long interview on episode 34 that was incredibly interesting. Unfortunately, I only got through about half of the topics I wanted to talk with him about, so we decided we would try to do a sequel sometime, but it was great to get a European view of things for the show, and here's how I introduced Juha. Well, Juha Ruokangas started his company in the mid-90s, and as you'll hear, was a very early internet adopter when the web was just in its infancy. In fact, he was one of the first custom guitar builders to even have a website. I remember those times where sites were mostly text and hyperlinks and a few images. But Ruokangas Guitars has developed a reputation for innovation and high quality over many years from a small country nearly 6,000 miles from us. And yet, it's like there's no distance at all, and his work and dedication to elevating the industry he's part of into an international community is but one of his many accomplishments. But there's a lot more to talk about, so let's get to it, as Juha Ruokangas joins us from Finland, right here and right now. And again at Winter NAMM, Juha was stationed at the boutique guitar showcase with a bunch of other great builders, but this guy is really kind of the Jules Verne of guitar builders, and he had an amazing display there that featured his new valve bucker guitar, which you can find out a lot more about at rukongas.com, and good luck with the spelling. I've said more than once what great fun this is, and part of that is just meeting and getting to know so many terrific people in the business. And one such person is Tish Ciravolo, the founder and CEO of Daisy Rock Guitars. Tish has such a great story to tell and this wonderful warm energy that you can really feel in this interview from episode 35. Here's the intro. So Tish Ciravolo is the founder and CEO of Daisy Rock Guitars. And as you'll hear, she's had a really significant impact on the guitar market by essentially inventing the market category of girl guitars. There have been other companies, some big ones for that matter, that have attempted to enter that segment, if you will. But for the last 18 years, Tish has been on a mission with Daisy Rock, and there's a lot to talk about. So let's just get to it as Tish Ciravolo joins us right here and right now. I did manage to collect a few great selfies with Tish at Winter NAMM, and you can really see her personality, which is just over the top. And on top of that, she's a terrific bass player. And I was fortunate enough to have both her and her husband, Michael Ciravolo of Schecter Guitars, on our holiday show. And you hear more about him upcoming on episode 40. And check out Daisy Rock Guitars when you have a moment. Well, interviewing Phil Rich in episode 38 was a corporate experience for sure. You see, he's the senior vice president and chief merchandising officer for Sweetwater. But he's a very knowledgeable guy and was really able to give us an inside look at the process internally at Sweetwater, and that's something that most of us would never see. Here's my intro for Phil. So Phil Rich joined Sweetwater about 7 years ago after spending a decade or so climbing up the corporate ranks at Guitar Center. He's definitely a guitar guy, very knowledgeable and engaging, and we're going to do a deep dive into the workings of Sweetwater's guitar business as Phil Rich joins us right here and right now. I must say that Phil, like many others, has been kind enough to refer a number of higher-ups in the industry to our show, and of course we're very grateful for that. I would imagine very few of you have not visited sweetwater.com, but if you'd like to read more about Phil, just click on the About section and then on Team. He's there. So many of you may know of David Koltai as one of the founders of Pigtronics, but a new aspect of his career has been the acquisition and resurrection of the legendary Supro brand. And in this interview, in episode 39, we really get a firsthand description of how all that came to be. And here's the intro for Dave. So David Koltai co-founded Pigtronics with a good friend of his back around 2003. And has built a successful pedal business with many wins along the way. But things took a very positive turn in 2014 when the company acquired the rights to the legendary Supro brand, and that has catapulted them to an entirely new level. There's definitely a lot to talk about as David Koltai joins us right here and right now. Well, Dave is a very energetic guy, to say the least, so believe me, I was tired after this interview. And as a side note, it was a long interview, and somehow in the process, we lost about 20 minutes at the end. Literally lost it. Gone. And this is the only time something like that has ever happened here in our studio. Fortunately, even though we were on a deadline, we were able to bring Dave back the next morning for a redo, and all was well. Of course, if you want more info, just visit pigtronics.com or suprousa.com. Well, as you'll hear in episode 40, Michael Ciravolo does not fit the mold of a typical CEO. But why should he? Nevertheless, he's a fixture at Schecter Guitars and has been running the company for a couple of decades. And besides talking about the business, we found out a lot more about a new album he'd put out in 2018 as a guitar player and had some really major talent joining him, including his wife, Tish, who we interviewed in episode 35. Here's the intro. Michael Ciravolo is the president and CEO of Schecter Guitars and has been for many years. Although he really didn't climb the corporate ladder in the traditional sense, he actually built the ladder. And more than 2 decades later, he's running one of the top-selling guitar companies in the world. He has a compelling story, and there's so much to talk about. So let's get to it as Michael Ciravolo joins us right here and right now. So I had looked forward to seeing Michael at Winter NAMM, and after spending a bit of time talking with Tish, she pointed me to the Schecter secret room on the second floor that you really can't find under normal circumstances. Eventually, though, I discovered an obscure elevator with guards guarding the entrance and a little sign that said Schecter. I asked if I could go up and see Michael, but with a very straight face, I was told he was busy and nobody's going up. Unfortunately, I ran out of time doing other things, so I guess I'll have to wait till next time, and I suppose I'll need to book an appointment or something. No big deal. I can always visit Schecter Guitars to see what's happening, and so can you. We haven't had too many retailers on the show, so bringing John Haber, the founder and CEO of Alto Music in New York, on in episode 41 was really a great opportunity to talk about a lot of issues concerning that segment of the industry today. But also of great interest was his particular story of how this business got started and how it grew over the years. Here's the John Haber intro. Well, John Haber refers to himself in his email signature as the grand poobah of Alto Music, the well-known chain of music stores that he's been running since the late 80s. But what's in a title anyway? He's the main guy. And I had a chance to sit down with him a few days ago, virtually, of course. And we talked about a lot of stuff that I think you're going to find really interesting. So let's just get to it as John Haber joins us right here and right now. Something else we talked about was his band and his love of performing and making music. There was a lot of good stuff. And if you're in the New York State area, you can find an Alto Music store within driving distance, I'm sure, maybe. But you can always visit them online at altomusic.com. Again, trying to break some new ground on GBR, I brought Rick Taylor from RBI Music onto the show for episode 42 to talk about the distribution side of the business. And we got a lot of useful information from Rick, and we learned more about his career path from player to business guy. And here's the intro. Well, Rick Taylor is the product manager for the Fret King and vintage guitar lines that are distributed by RBI Music in the United States. Since they took over the lines a few years ago, they've made some major gains in the market. And while Rick spent much of the first 20 years of his career as a working musician, like so many others we talked to, he made the transition to the business side in a big way and has never looked back. So let's find out what he has to say as Rick Taylor joins us right here and right now. For those of you who may not be familiar with RBI Music in our industry, they are the distributors in the U.S. for the vintage and Fret King lines of guitars that are closely associated with the work of Trev Wilkinson. And if you'd like to see more of what RBI sells, just visit rbimusic.com. So I'm going out on a limb here, and I'm going to suggest that there is probably not one of you listening to the show that's not familiar with the name of C.F. Martin Guitars. No one, I presume. And that's one of the reasons I was so happy to welcome Chris Martin to episode 43. He's been running the company for a long time, the company that's been in business for 185 years. He's not been there that long, but, there's a long history there. And he's an icon in the business, and this was a great interview. And here's how I introduced Chris. Well, Chris Martin is the CEO of CF Martin & Company. That's a lot of C's. He's been in that position for a long time, and he's been part of the rich family history of this iconic company that's been building extraordinary guitars for the last 185 years or so. There's so much to talk about that I'm not even sure where to begin, but I guess we'll have to start somewhere. So let's just get to it as Chris Martin joins us right here and right now. Well, this show with Chris has been really one of our most listened to episodes, and for good reason. He really gave us some insights about the company and his view of the business today from several angles. And if you've not listened to it, I highly recommend it. And might I mention martinguitar.com? So what did you think of this week's episode? We always want to hear from you. You can do that easily through the official episode page on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com or on Facebook and Twitter at Guitar Business, or email us directly at contact@guitarbusinessradio.com. And of course, if none of that's working for you, just call us on our GBR hotline at 888-777-2404. You can do that right now if you like, or later. Operators are currently helping other happy customers. If you call right now, we can stop all of that. So, as we come to the end of an era, a short era, an era of fabulous, amazing intros that stepped in to fill a void of unknown origin. But what's interesting is that on the few occasions that I've had to break the format and do something different, it's always turned out to be a really positive thing. But I had to jump out of my comfort zone initially. And that can be quite unnerving for most people, or at least a little bit. I was working with one of our clients the other day who we're doing quite a bit of work with, and I was talking about this very thing. And you see this in small companies and bigger small companies as well, who've been operating for quite a while. Often, these businesses have developed routines and methods over the years, most of the time without any real significant overarching structure or planning. It may be haphazard or seat of the pants, but, it's worked. And that's very powerful. And they've developed a comfort zone around it. I've seen this all too many times. And it's not criticism. It's just the way it is. And as long as it's working, why mess with it? But sometimes you have to mess with it. Companies can experience unplanned or unexpected growth, and that really tests the ability of the comfortable systems to respond and handle the growth or expansion. Frequently, it doesn't go all that well. Some or many of you may have experienced something like that. At that point, life can get a bit tougher, and if you can't react quickly enough to handle the new load, there's a whole litany of things that can become problematic. So what I like to tell people is that no matter the size of your business, you can create scalable foundations for different aspects of your work that will adapt fairly easily to changes of any kind. But here's the biggest problem area that I've seen: the comfort zone. Chances are you've seen it, maybe experienced it. And here's the thing: growth is not always comfortable. There can be some discomfort in implementing and adapting to new and hopefully better ways of doing things. But usually the discomfort passes, sometimes very quickly, and it's a small price to pay for the benefits that may be achieved in the process. And this isn't just about business. We have all kinds of comfort zones in our personal lives, and this is a big topic. I'm not going to get into it here, but the principles are largely the same. Growth isn't always comfortable, and many people won't venture out of their comfort zones, even if it means a better life ultimately. It's pretty common. But if you should decide to step out of the zone in favor of seeking some kind of growth or improvement or whatever, I would always tell you to stay positive. Stay focused on your destination, but so important. Keep all the options open on how you're going to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week on episode 70. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.